Calm is not weakness, it's the weapon they never saw coming. The silence that replaced screams the moment the noise stopped. It didn't end with a scream. That's what still haunts me. I was braced for impact, for shattered words, for anger thrown like knives, for voices raised, fists clenched, truth bleeding out in ugly sentences. I was ready to fight. I had rehearsed it in my head 1,000 times. What I would say, what I would confess, what I would defend. How I would stand my ground even if my voice trembled. I was ready for chaos. And then nothing, no argument, no last strike, no final sentence to haunt my sleep, just silence. A silence so sudden it felt violent, like the air had been ripped out of the room, like the world had inhaled and forgotten how to breathe again. One moment everything was loud, emotions crashing into each other, thoughts colliding, my chest burning with words that needed to escape. And the next moment the noise stopped. Not slowly, not gently. It stopped like a switch had been flipped, like I'd been erased mid-sentence. I stood there, still armed for war, holding weapons that suddenly had no enemy. That's the first wound no one talks about, the wound of being ready and being abandoned instead. You didn't argue, you didn't confront me, you didn't look me in the eye and tell me why. You disappeared. And in that moment I realized something far more painful than hatred. Silence isn't neutral. Silence is a decision. It chose me as its victim. I kept waiting for the echo, for the aftershock, for the delayed explosion that never came. I stared at empty spaces where your words should have been, unread messages that would never arrive, questions hanging in the air like ghosts with no bodies. My mind kept asking, did I miss something? Did I imagine it? Was it really over, or was this some cruel pause before the storm? But the storm never came, just stillness. An unnatural calm that crawled under my skin. I checked my phone like it was a heartbeat monitor. Dead, silent, unresponsive. I replayed our last moments again and again, searching for a clue, a crack, a sign, anything that would explain why words were replaced by absence. Nothing, no closure, no explanation, no final blow to make the pain honest, just disappearance. And that's when confusion turned into something darker, because I wasn't mourning a loss. I was questioning my existence. When someone argues with you, they acknowledge you. When someone hates you, they still see you. But when someone vanishes, it's like they looked at you and decided you weren't worth the effort of a goodbye. That realization hit slower than anger, heavier than grief. I wasn't screaming. I wasn't crying. I was frozen, paralyzed between disbelief and dread. I walked through familiar spaces that suddenly felt foreign, rooms that remembered you even when you refused to remember me. Walls that echoed with conversations that now felt imaginary. Every object felt like a question mark. Every silence felt accusatory. And the worst part, I kept preparing for a fight that would never happen. My body was tense, my mind alert, my heart pounding like the war had already begun, but there was no battlefield, only abandonment. That's when the betrayal truly revealed itself. Not in words, not in actions, but in absence, because silence doesn't just leave you alone. It traps you with yourself. It forces you to replay every mistake, magnify every flaw, interrogate every memory like a crime scene. I asked myself things I never wanted to ask. Was I that easy to walk away from? Was I so insignificant that I didn't even deserve an ending? Was I invisible long before you vanished? And the silence didn't answer, it just watched. Cold, patient, unforgiving. I was ready to bleed in an argument, ready to be wounded by truth. Ready to stand tall even if it hurt, but I wasn't ready to be erased. You didn't slam the door, you didn't light the match, you didn't pull the trigger, you simply left the room and turned off the lights. And I was left standing there, still holding my rage, still gripping my pain with nowhere to throw it. That's when shock set in, not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind, the kind that makes you feel unreal, like you're watching yourself from a distance. Like your emotions are underwater and every thought is slow and heavy. I laughed once. A short, broken sound. Because part of me couldn't believe it. This can't be how it ends, I thought. This isn't even an ending. And that thought hurt more than any insult ever could. Because an insult means you mattered enough to provoke. An argument means you mattered enough to confront. Silence means you weren't worth the noise. I stood in that moment longer than I care to admit, stuck between what I felt and what I refused to accept. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from restraint, from words trapped behind my teeth, from emotions with no direction. I didn't know where to put the pain, so it stayed inside me. And that's how it started, not with fury, not with vengeance, but with a quiet, devastating realization. The first betrayal wasn't what you did. It was what you refused to say. And as the noise faded completely, as the echoes died one by one, as the world settled into that cruel calm, I understood something that would change me forever. The moment the noise stopped was the moment something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deep enough that nothing would ever be the same again. I was prepared for war, not erasure. I didn't come empty-handed. I came armed. Armed with words sharpened by sleepless nights. Armed with truth I was finally brave enough to speak. Armed with anger I had learned to hold steady instead of letting it explode. I didn't stumble into that moment unprepared. I trained for it in silence. I argued with ghosts in my head. I stood alone and practiced standing my ground. I told myself this time I won't back down. This time I'll say everything. This time I won't beg to be understood. I was ready for war. I was ready for raised voices and shattered illusions. Ready for the kind of honesty that burns on the way out. Ready to be wounded if it meant being seen. Because at least in a fight, pain has direction. Anger knows where to go, words know where to land. Damage has a source, but you didn't fight me. You didn't stand your ground. You didn't push back. You didn't even flinch. You vanished. And all that anger I had built, all that heat, all that pressure had nowhere to land. Do you know what that does to a person? Anger without a target doesn't disappear. It turns inward. It eats. It corrodes. I stood there with my fists clenched around nothing. My jaw tight, my chest burning, my pulse screaming for release. And there was no one to hear it. I didn't need you to agree with me. I didn't need forgiveness. I didn't even need kindness. I needed resistance. I needed friction. I needed impact. I needed to know that my presence demanded a response. Instead, you gave me the most ruthless move of all. You made me irrelevant. That's the cruelty no one warns you about. A fight means you mattered enough to oppose. Silence means you weren't worth the effort. I would have taken your anger. I would have taken your accusations. I would have taken your hatred if it meant you stayed in the room. But you chose disappearance. And suddenly I wasn't fighting an enemy. I was fighting emptiness. Say something, say anything, say my name. That thought echoed in my head like a desperate prayer I hated myself for needing. Say I was wrong, say I was too much, say I failed you, say you're done with me. Just don't erase me, but the silence didn't break, it stretched, it thickened. It wrapped itself around my throat. I replayed every possible version of the argument we never had. In one version I won, in another I lost. In some we both bled, but at least we were there. At least we existed in the same moment. Your disappearance stole that from me. It robbed me of release. It turned my rage into a cage. I kept thinking maybe they're waiting for me to speak first. Maybe this is some twisted test. Maybe silence is temporary, so I waited, and waiting became humiliation. Every minute without a response chipped away at my certainty. Every unanswered moment whispered doubt. If I mattered, wouldn't they respond? If I was worth fighting, wouldn't they fight back? That's when resentment began to grow. Not loud, not explosive, slow, heavy, patient. Because anger fades when it's spent, but resentment survives. Resentment remembers. I realized something terrifying in that quiet. You didn't disappear because you were weak. You disappeared because it was easier than accountability, easier than confrontation, easier than standing in the discomfort of truth. You chose the clean escape. You left me with the mess, all the words you refused to say, they became my burden, all the anger you avoided, it became my inheritance, I carried it alone. And that loneliness didn't make me softer, it made me sharp. I stopped pacing, stopped hoping, stopped checking for signs that would never come. Instead, I stood still. And in that stillness, something shifted. I felt the rage change temperature. It wasn't burning anymore. It was cold, focused, controlled. Because when anger has no outlet, it learns discipline. I started to understand the difference between fighting someone and surviving what they leave behind. You thought disappearing would end the conflict. You were wrong. You just changed the battlefield. The war moved inward. And I was forced to become both soldier and enemy. Say something, say anything, say my name. That line kept looping, not as a plea anymore, but as an accusation. Because every time you chose silence, you made a statement. You said I wasn't worth the noise. You said my presence was optional. You said erasure was cleaner than truth. And I listened. I listened carefully. Because silence teaches you things words never will. It teaches you who people really are when accountability knocks. It teaches you how disposable you are to those who fear confrontation. It teaches you that some people would rather vanish than be exposed. That lesson hurt, but it also hardened me. I stopped romanticizing closure, stopped believing everyone deserves access to me, stopped thinking conflict is something to fear, because conflict means engagement, disappearance means dismissal, and I will never mistake the two again. I was prepared for war, prepared to bleed, prepared to be broken open and stitched back together by truth. What I wasn't prepared for was to be erased like I never stood there at all. That was the moment resentment took root, not as a weakness, as a weapon. Because when someone disappears instead of fighting, they don't defeat you. They reveal themselves, and once you see that clearly, you never fight the same way again. When silence became the loudest weapon, silence isn't empty. That's the lie they tell you. Silence is armed. It doesn't shout. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't announce itself before it strikes. It just waits. And then it steps forward, calm and precise, like an executioner who doesn't hate you enough to raise their voice. I learned that the hard way. Because when you ignore someone long enough, you don't just hurt them, you dismantle them. Silence doesn't argue facts. It argues existence. It asks a single question over and over without mercy. Do you even matter? And when there's no answer, the mind starts answering for you. I felt it tightening slowly, not like a punch, like a rope. Every unanswered moment pulled a little more air from my chest. Every ignored thought pressed heavier on my ribs. I wasn't being attacked. I was being erased. That's the cruelty of it. A blade leaves a wound you can point to. A scream leaves a memory you can replay. But silence leaves nothing you can fight, only shadows where your identity used to stand. I tried to speak louder inside my own head, tried to convince myself I was still real, still solid, still here, but silence doesn't debate, it outlasts. It sat across from me like a figure without a face, watching me unravel with infinite patience. It didn't rush, it didn't need to. because it knew something I didn't yet understand. If you take away someone's reflection long enough, they stop recognizing themselves. I began to feel it. The slow fracture. The way my name felt unfamiliar in my mouth. The way my thoughts started questioning their right to exist. I would form a sentence in my head and then stop halfway through. Who am I even saying this to? That's when the suffocation started. Not physical, psychological, like being buried without dirt, like drowning without water. I was breathing, but it didn't feel like living. I was moving, but it felt mechanical, automatic, detached. Silence had found its rhythm. It whispered without words, "You're too much. You're not enough. You were never important. If you were, someone would respond." And the worst part? Those thoughts started sounding like my own voice. That's how silence wins. It doesn't introduce itself as the enemy. It convinces you that you are. I looked for myself everywhere, in memories, in old words, in echoes of who I used to be before the quiet closed in. But every place I searched felt hollow, like walking through rooms after a fire where the structure still stands but the soul has been burned out. Silence stood there unblinking. An executioner doesn't need rage, only certainty. And silence was certain. Certain that if it waited long enough, I would do the job for it. I started shrinking, not physically. Internally, I questioned every impulse, every emotion, every instinct to reach out. I told myself, don't speak, don't move, don't make noise, because making noise without an answer feels like humiliation. So I learned to swallow words whole, and swallowed words become poison. They don't disappear, they spread, they rot. I felt my identity thinning like smoke pulled apart by wind. I used to know what I stood for, what I deserved, what I would never tolerate. Silence took that confidence and starved it, day by day, minute by minute, until certainty felt arrogant and self-respect felt negotiable. That's the psychological violence no one warns you about. Silence doesn't bruise the skin, it bruises the sense of self. It makes you doubt your own weight in the world. I began apologizing in my head for existing, for wanting answers, for wanting acknowledgement, for wanting to be seen. Silence taught me shame without ever saying a word. It taught me how to disappear while still standing upright. I became smaller to survive it, and that was its greatest victory. Because when silence becomes the loudest weapon, it doesn't just hurt you, it reshapes you. It trains you to accept less, to expect nothing, to believe that being ignored is normal, that your presence is optional, that your voice is disposable. I felt myself suffocating under that belief, like a shadow trying to remember what cast it, like a name written in disappearing ink. I would sit with the quiet and feel it watching me, measuring me, waiting for collapse. And sometimes I almost gave it what it wanted. Sometimes I almost accepted the lie that I was nothing more than the absence you left behind. But something inside me resisted, barely, a flicker, a stubborn, aching refusal to fully disappear. Because even as silence tightened its grip, I noticed something strange. It needed me quiet to stay powerful. It needed me doubting to stay lethal. The moment I questioned the silence itself, it wavered, just a little. And in that hesitation, I understood the truth. Silence only works on those who still care. It only suffocates those who haven't gone numb yet. It only dismantles identities that are still alive enough to feel the pressure. That realization didn't free me. Not yet, but it cracked the blade. Because an executioner without certainty is just a figure standing still. I was collapsing internally, yes. But collapse is not the same as surrender. Even as my identity frayed, even as my breath felt shallow and thin, even as the void pressed closer, something remained. Anger, quiet and coiled, not explosive, not dramatic, patient. watching the silence the way the silence had watched me. And for the first time, the quiet didn't feel infinite. It felt afraid, because silence can dismantle who you are, but it cannot kill what you become after surviving it. And even in that suffocating stillness, as shadows crawled and the void tried to close its grip, I wasn't gone. I was changing, slowly, painfully, but inevitably. Silence thought it was my executioner. It didn't realize it was only the pressure before the transformation. I replayed every word that never came when the silence settled in. My mind refused to rest. It couldn't, because unanswered moments don't fade. They multiply. I replayed conversations that never happened as if they were memories instead of fantasies. Over and over, relentless, precise. I argued with you in my head like it was real. I imagined your voice cutting back at mine. Imagine the way you would deny, deflect, justify. Imagine the anger in your eyes. Imagine the pauses between words. Sometimes in those imagined arguments I won. My words were sharp, unbreakable, final. Sometimes I lost, I stumbled, I hesitated, I said the wrong thing at the wrong time, and sometimes you apologized. That was the cruelest version, because I could hear it so clearly. The apology that never came, the explanation that would have made sense of everything. I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't know how to face it. I was scared. I played those words on repeat until they felt real enough to hurt. That's what silence does to you. It turns imagination into torture. Every possibility becomes a weapon. Every version of reality becomes plausible. And the mind, desperate for meaning, starts turning inward. That's when self-blame began to seep in. Quietly, patiently. Like poison disguised as logic. Maybe I pushed too hard. Maybe I expected too much. Maybe I said the wrong thing. Maybe I wasn't worth the explanation. Those thoughts didn't scream. They whispered. They dressed themselves up as reason, as reflection, as maturity. But they were lies, lies that sounded convincing because they came from my own voice. I dissected myself piece by piece, every flaw magnified, every mistake replayed, every weakness dragged into the light and interrogated. I asked questions that had no answers. If I had stayed quieter, would you have stayed longer? If I had been stronger, would you have fought instead of leaving? If I mattered more, would you have said something? That's how doubt works. It doesn't attack all at once, it erodes, slowly. It chips away at confidence until certainty feels arrogant, until self-trust feels naive, until you start apologizing to yourself for existing as you are. I started questioning instincts I used to rely on, my judgment, my perception, my worth. I wondered if I had imagined the connection, if I had exaggerated the meaning. If the silence was proof that I had been wrong all along. And the more I replayed those silent moments, the more power they took from me. Because doubt doesn't need evidence, it feeds on absence. It thrives in gaps, in unanswered spaces, in conversations that never happened. I began rewriting history in my head. Moments that once felt solid now felt fragile. Promises that once felt real now felt exaggerated. I wondered if I had misread everything. And that thought hurt more than abandonment. Because abandonment says, they chose to leave. But doubt whispers, they were never really there. I would catch myself staring into nothing, lost in a loop of imagined words. Words I would say, words you would say back. Words that would finally explain why I was left holding silence like a verdict. And then the realization would hit again. None of it was real. I was fighting ghosts, arguing with echoes, begging phantoms for closure. And every time I recognized that, a new layer of exhaustion settled in. Because the mind can only run on questions for so long before it starts breaking itself apart. I felt my confidence corrode, not dramatically, subtly, like rust spreading beneath the surface. I hesitated more, second-guessed more, spoke less. I started editing myself before anyone else could, because silence had taught me a dangerous lesson, that saying nothing is safer than saying something and being ignored. So I swallowed thoughts before they formed, swallowed emotions before they rose. I told myself it was control. It was fear wearing discipline's face. I didn't trust my voice anymore, didn't trust my reactions, didn't trust my right to demand answers. Because somewhere along the way, silence convinced me that wanting clarity was a weakness, that needing acknowledgement was a flaw, that if I were stronger, I wouldn't need anyone to explain themselves. That's how self-destruction begins. Not with violence, with doubt, with the slow internal dismantling of self-respect. I punished myself in private, replaying moments where I could have been better, kinder, calmer, smarter, as if perfection would have saved me from erasure, as if flawlessness could force someone to stay. I carried the weight of words you never spoke like they were my responsibility, and that weight bent me. I stopped looking outward for answers and started turning every unanswered question inward. That's when vulnerability reached its deepest point. Because vulnerability without validation becomes self-loathing. I stood there, stripped not by insult, but by imagination. Every imagined argument took a little more from me. Every imagined apology reminded me of what I would never receive, and the silence watched, unmoved, unapologetic. But here's the truth I didn't understand then. The mind replays what the heart hasn't accepted. I wasn't searching for answers. I was resisting reality. Resisting the fact that some people don't explain themselves. Some people don't apologize. Some people don't fight. They disappear. And the longer I replayed words that never came, the longer I stayed trapped in their absence. Still in that broken state, something inside me remained awake. Even as doubt gnawed at my confidence, even as self-blame pressed heavier, there was a quiet anger forming beneath the questions, an anger directed not outward yet, but inward at first. At how much power I had given to silence, at how deeply I had let absence rewrite me. That anger didn't save me immediately, but it slowed the decay. Because the moment you recognize self-destruction, you're already standing at its edge instead of falling blindly into it. I was vulnerable, exposed, cracked, but not gone, still replaying words that never came, yes. Still doubting myself, yes. But somewhere between the imagined apologies and the imagined arguments, I began to sense it. The exhaustion, the limit, the quiet realization that if I kept searching for answers in silence, I would disappear too. And I wasn't ready for that, not yet, not completely. Because doubt may corrode confidence, but it also reveals where strength must be rebuilt. And even in my most fragile moments, even while replaying ghosts, I was still here, breathing, thinking, enduring. And that meant the story wasn't finished. It meant this wasn't the end of my voice. Only the last moment before it changed forever. You left me alone with my demons when you disappeared. You didn't just leave me alone. You locked the door behind you. And in that silence, everything I had been avoiding stepped forward. All the things I kept buried under noise, under distraction, under other people's voices, they came for me, because absence doesn't just create emptiness, it creates exposure. There was nowhere left to hide, no conversation to drown the thoughts. No presence to soften the edges, no distraction strong enough to keep the darkness quiet. You left me alone with my demons, and for the first time I had to look at them without flinching. They didn't arrive screaming, they never do. They arrived calmly, patiently, like they had been waiting their turn. Every insecurity I pretended didn't exist. Every fear I dismissed as weakness. Every rage I kept under control to remain acceptable. They stood in front of me and smiled. Not because they hated me, but because they knew me. Pain became a mirror, and I couldn't look away. I saw the parts of myself I had spent years denying, the hunger for control, the resentment I called ambition, the anger I wrapped in politeness. I saw how close I always was to the edge, and I realized something terrifying. You weren't the reason these demons existed. You were the reason they stayed quiet. Your presence had been a barrier, a distraction, a leash. When you vanished, the leash snapped. And the demons didn't attack me. They introduced themselves. They spoke in my voice. They asked questions no one else dared to ask. Why do you need approval? Why do you hesitate when you know you're right? Why do you keep shrinking to make others comfortable? Each question cut deeper than the last, because I didn't have answers. I only had habits, and habits crumble under isolation. That's when pain stopped being something I endured and became something I studied. I examined it, turned it around, looked at it from every angle, and pain stared back, unblinking. It showed me every scar I never let heal properly. Every compromise I convinced myself was maturity. Every moment I chose peace over truth. Pain didn't judge me, it exposed me. And exposure is dangerous, because once you see yourself clearly, you can never return to ignorance. The demons didn't demand worship. They demanded honesty. They asked me to admit what I wanted, but never said out loud. Power, control, freedom from being dismissed. They asked me to admit how much I hated being replaceable, how deeply it burned to be treated as optional, how humiliating it felt to realize that silence could erase me. I wanted to deny it. I tried to tell myself I was better than that, stronger than that, above that kind of need. But isolation strips away performance. When there's no one left to impress, truth rises, and the truth was ugly. I wanted to be undeniable. I wanted to be feared instead of forgotten. I wanted to become something that no one could walk away from without consequence. Those thoughts scared me because they didn't sound like the person I thought I was. They sounded like something darker, something sharper, something honest. The demons didn't force those thoughts into me. They revealed them, and that's when I understood the real danger of being left alone. Not loneliness, clarity. Clarity is merciless. It doesn't comfort. It doesn't soften blows. It shows you exactly who you are when no one is watching. And who I saw was someone capable of becoming dangerous. Not violent, focused, not cruel, uncompromising. I started talking to that darkness instead of running from it. I asked it what it wanted. It didn't hesitate. It wanted strength without permission, identity without validation, power without apology. It wanted me to stop begging for acknowledgement and start becoming unavoidable. That realization shook me, because every rule I had lived by suddenly felt optional. Be kind, be patient, be understanding. All those lessons sounded hollow when I remembered how easily I had been erased. The demons reminded me of that erasure over and over, not to torment me, to harden me. They replayed the silence like a warning. This is what happens when you rely on others to define your worth. This is what happens when you let people decide your importance. This is what happens when you expect fairness from those who fear confrontation. The pain sharpened into something else. Resolve. I stopped asking why you left. That question belonged to a weaker version of me. Instead, I asked myself a different question. What kind of person survives this? And the answer didn't come gently. The answer demanded transformation. It demanded I stop being harmless, because harmless people are easy to ignore. Harmless people are easy to leave behind. The demons showed me the cost of softness in a world that disappears instead of explaining. They showed me how isolation forges something brutal and precise if you don't break under it. I felt myself changing, not suddenly, gradually, like pressure reshaping stone. I stopped seeking comfort in familiar thoughts, stopped replaying imagined apologies, stopped begging the past to make sense. I began to sit with the darkness longer, listen to it, learn from it. It taught me discipline. It taught me restraint. It taught me how to endure without witnesses. Because strength developed in isolation doesn't need applause. It doesn't need permission. It doesn't announce itself. It waits. And that scared me more than the pain ever did, because pain makes you desperate. Isolation makes you deliberate. I realized then that being left alone wasn't just abandonment. It was initiation. You left me alone with my demons thinking they would consume me. You were wrong. They sharpened me. They stripped away illusions, burned away weakness I didn't know I carried, exposed hunger I was taught to suppress. And for the first time, I stopped apologizing to myself for wanting more strength, more control, more permanence. The descent didn't feel like falling anymore. It felt like sinking into something familiar, like I had always belonged here but never had the silence required to realize it. I didn't become cruel. I became honest. And honesty, when paired with pain, creates something the world doesn't know how to handle. I wasn't saved in the darkness. I was forged. You left me alone with my demons, and they didn't destroy me. They taught me how to stand without needing anyone to stay. They taught me how to breathe without asking permission. They taught me how to survive erasure by becoming something that cannot be ignored. This was the descent, not into madness, into truth. And once you descend far enough, there is no returning to who you were before, only rising as something else, something darker, something stronger, something that no silence will ever control again. I wasn't worth the fight, was I? That's the question that finally broke me, not screamed, not thrown like an accusation, spoken quietly, honestly. Alone, I wasn't worth the fight, was I? Because if I was, you would have stayed, you would have argued, you would have raised your voice instead of erasing mine. People fight for what matters to them. They don't vanish. And once that thought takes root, it poisons everything. It doesn't rush, it settles in. It sits behind your eyes and waits for weak moments, and suddenly every memory changes shape. I stopped asking why you left and started asking what was wrong with me. That's how deep it went. I looked at myself like a broken object trying to figure out where the defect was. Too intense, too quiet, too demanding, too forgiving, too much, not enough. Pick one, pick all. Because when someone leaves without a fight, your mind assumes the verdict is obvious. You weren't worth the effort. That's the sentence that echoes when the room is too quiet. I felt disposable, like something temporary. Convenient, replaceable, like I was never meant to stay. Like my role was to exist briefly, serve a purpose, and then be discarded without explanation. That realization hollowed me out, not violently, slowly. I started measuring my value by how easily I was left behind. And the scale was brutal. If I mattered, wouldn't you have tried? If I was important, wouldn't you have fought for clarity instead of choosing silence? If I had value, wouldn't you have cared enough to say goodbye? Those questions didn't come with answers. They came with conclusions. Conclusions I didn't want to accept but couldn't escape. I wasn't chosen. I wasn't defended. I wasn't fought for. And when you reach that point, self-worth doesn't shatter. It dissolves. You don't feel dramatic pain. You feel small, insignificant, like you could disappear tomorrow and the world would adjust without pause. I started doubting my place in every room. Every conversation felt conditional. Every connection felt temporary. I stopped assuming permanence. I stopped assuming loyalty. I stopped assuming I mattered. Because once you're treated as optional, you start living like you are. I kept my expectations low, my needs quiet, my presence restrained. I told myself it was maturity. It was. It was survival. I was afraid that if I took up too much space, someone else would disappear too. So I learned how to be less demanding, less visible, less real. I trained myself to accept scraps of attention and call it understanding. I lowered the bar so far that basic acknowledgement felt like generosity. That's how deep the fracture went. I stopped believing I deserved effort. I questioned every compliment, every moment of affection, every sign of interest. They'll leave too, I thought. Just wait, and that expectation became armor. Heavy, ugly, necessary. I told myself not to care, not because I didn't feel, but because feeling had proven dangerous. Caring made me vulnerable. Caring made me disposable. So I learned how to detach before anyone else could. I told myself I didn't need people, that I was fine alone. That independence was strength. But underneath that narrative was a quiet grief I refused to acknowledge. The grief of realizing that I wasn't worth being fought for. I didn't cry about it. I resented it. I resented how easily you let go, how effortlessly you walked away, how little resistance there was. I resented the way silence implied certainty. Because doubt argues, silence concludes, and the conclusion felt final. You had decided. And whatever you decided, I wasn't enough to challenge it. That thought sat heavy in my chest. Every time I saw people fight for each other, it burned. Every time I watched someone choose effort, it stung. Because it reminded me that I wasn't chosen, I wasn't defended, I wasn't worth the discomfort, and bitterness crept in. Not explosive bitterness, controlled, restrained. The kind that tightens your jaw instead of raising your voice. The kind that makes you smile while something inside you withers. I became careful, calculated. I stopped offering more than I could afford to lose. Because I had learned something brutal. People will take what you give and leave when it's inconvenient. So I guarded myself, not with walls, with indifference. Or at least something that looked like it. But indifference born from pain isn't strength. It's exhaustion. I was tired of proving my worth, tired of hoping someone would stay, tired of wondering what more I needed to be. I asked myself the question again. I wasn't worth the fight, was I? And for a moment, a dangerous moment, I almost accepted it. Almost let that belief define me. Almost let it become my truth. But something stopped me. Not hope. Anger. Anger at the idea that my value could be measured by someone else's cowardice. Anger at the thought that silence could decide my worth. Anger at how close I came to shrinking myself to fit someone else's inability to confront. That anger didn't roar, it simmered. And in that simmering heat, another realization began to form. Maybe I wasn't fought for not because I lacked value, but because I demanded accountability. Maybe my presence required honesty they weren't ready to give. Maybe my questions were inconvenient. Maybe my existence challenged comfort. That thought didn't heal me, but it shifted something. Because if that was true, then being left behind wasn't proof of insignificance. It was proof of friction. And friction only happens when something resists being ignored. Still, the damage was done. The fracture was real. I had touched rock bottom. I had looked at myself and questioned my right to be valued. That kind of doubt doesn't disappear quickly. It leaves scars, but scars mean survival, and survival changes you. I wasn't the same after that realization. I was colder, sharper, less willing to beg for relevance. Because once you accept that no one is coming to fight for you, you stop waiting to be chosen. You stop hoping for defense. You start preparing to stand alone. That was my emotional death. the death of expectation, the death of innocence, the death of believing effort would be mutual. Something soft died there, something trusting, and something else began to take its place. Not yet strength, not yet dominance, but resolve, quiet, unforgiving. If I wasn't worth the fight to you, then I would become someone who never needed it. Someone who didn't rely on others to validate their existence. Someone who could be left and still stand. That thought didn't comfort me. It hardened me. And from that emotional rock bottom, from that moment of absolute doubt, I stopped asking if I was worth the fight and started asking a far more dangerous question. What happens when I decide I am? Disappearance is a choice, and you chose it. You didn't fade away. You didn't get lost. You didn't drift. You chose to disappear, and that matters, because absence isn't neutral, silence isn't innocent, distance isn't accidental. Disappearance is a decision. Say it with me. Feel it settle in your bones. You chose it. For a long time, I blamed myself. I carried the weight of your absence like a sentence handed down by fate. I told myself you had no other option. That life was complicated. That timing was cruel. That people leave for reasons that don't always have villains. I tried to be generous with your silence. I tried to make excuses for your vanishing, but the truth kept knocking, louder every time. You didn't disappear because you had to. You disappeared because staying required courage, because staying meant answering questions you didn't want to face, because staying meant discomfort, because staying meant accountability. And that was too heavy for you to carry, so you dropped it. You dropped the conversation. You dropped the connection. You dropped the responsibility, and you walked away calling it peace. But let me make something very clear. Peace doesn't abandon people. Peace doesn't erase voices. Peace doesn't leave wounds unanswered. That wasn't peace. That was escape. You didn't choose neutrality, you chose avoidance. You didn't choose calm, you chose comfort. You didn't choose distance to heal. You chose distance to hide. And for a long time, I let that choice define me. I let your absence feel like a verdict on my worth. I let your silence feel like proof of my failure. But here's what I finally understood. Your disappearance says nothing about my value. It reveals your limits. It exposes your threshold. It shows exactly how much pressure you could withstand before folding. Because when things got real, when words needed to be spoken, when honesty demanded presence, you vanished. Not because you were weak, but because you refused to be strong. There's a difference. Strength stays when it's hard. Strength speaks when it's uncomfortable. Strength confronts instead of fleeing. And you chose the easiest exit. You chose the quiet door. You chose to disappear and call it maturity. But maturity doesn't ghost. Maturity doesn't abandon without explanation. Maturity doesn't leave someone standing alone in the aftermath of shared meaning. Maturity owns its decisions. Disappearance avoids them. And once that truth sharpened in my mind, the anger changed. It stopped being chaotic. It stopped burning everything in sight. It focused. It stabilized. Because I wasn't angry at myself anymore. I was angry at the lie. The lie that disappearance is harmless. The lie that silence is respectful. The lie that walking away without a word is somehow noble. No, disappearing is a form of violence, a quiet one, a clean one. The kind that leaves no fingerprints but still breaks something inside the person left behind. You don't get to rewrite that. You don't get to vanish and pretend nothing was owed. Connection creates responsibility. Words exchanged create weight. Time shared creates obligation. And when you disappear, you're not opting out of conflict, you're transferring it. You hand it to the one who stays. You let them carry the confusion, the unanswered questions, the self-doubt. You walk away lighter because you left your burden behind, and for a while I carried it. I carried your unfinished sentences, your unsaid truths, your unresolved intentions. I carried them like they were mine to solve. But they never were. Your silence belongs to you. Your disappearance belongs to you. And the consequences of that choice, they belong to you too. I'm not responsible for your inability to stay. I'm not at fault for your refusal to confront. I'm not broken because you chose the exit instead of the conversation. That realization didn't make me soft. It made me sharp. Because once you see disappearance for what it is, you stop romanticizing it. You stop chasing ghosts. You stop waiting for people who have already chosen absence. And that's when power returns. Slowly, deliberately. You realize something dangerous. If someone can disappear that easily, they were never standing firmly to begin with. They were already halfway gone, already unstable, already preparing the escape. You didn't lose something solid. You lost something fragile, something that couldn't withstand pressure. And I don't mourn fragile foundations anymore. I don't beg for people who flee at the first sign of discomfort. I don't chase those who mistake avoidance for strength, because I know who I am now. I am not someone who disappears. I stay, I face, I speak. Even when my voice shakes, even when my hands tremble, even when the truth costs me comfort. And that makes me dangerous, because I no longer confuse abandonment with failure. I see it clearly. Disappearance is a choice, and when someone chooses it, they are telling you exactly who they are. Believe them, not their excuses, not their silence, not the stories you invent to soften the blow. Believe the action. They chose not to fight. They chose not to speak. They chose not to stay, and that choice frees you. Because once you accept it, you stop waiting for closure from people who ran from accountability. You create your own. You stop asking why they left and start acknowledging that they couldn't handle staying. And that shift, that's where control returns. The anger stops spilling everywhere. It becomes fuel, focused, controlled, purposeful. I'm not raging anymore. I'm awake. I see patterns now. I recognize exits disguised as excuses. I hear silence before it settles in, and I no longer personalize it, because disappearance doesn't reflect the worth of the one abandoned. It exposes the character of the one who left, so let them go, let them vanish. Let them choose absence, because I no longer need their presence to validate mine. I stand without them, I move without them, I rise without them. And here's the truth they'll never escape. Disappearing spared them the discomfort of facing me. But it didn't erase me. Forged me. And the next time they hear my name, the next time they see my shadow, they won't see someone waiting to be chosen. They'll see someone who stayed, someone who endured, someone who learned that disappearance is a choice and power belongs to those who refuse to make it. You didn't leave me, you deleted me, you didn't leave me. Leaving would have meant turning around. Leaving would have meant a final look. Leaving would have meant acknowledgement. You didn't do that. You deleted me. No goodbye, no echo, no trace. One moment I existed in your world, in your words, in your memory, in the shape of your days, and the next I was gone, not absent, erased, as if I had never been there at all. No explanation, no warning, no reckoning, just a clean cut through reality. No goodbye, no echo, no trace. Do you know what that does to a person? It doesn't just hurt, it unravels, because pain still acknowledges existence. Pain still says you mattered enough to be wounded. But erasure says you were disposable, interchangeable, unworthy of memory. And that realization sinks deeper than any blade. I searched for myself in the aftermath, in old conversations, in shared moments, in the spaces where my name used to live, and everywhere I looked there was nothing. Holes where memories should have been, silence where recognition once stood. You didn't just walk away. You removed me from the story, as if my presence had been a mistake you could simply undo. No goodbye, no echo. No trace. At first, grief came quietly, not screaming, not dramatic, just a heavy pressure on the chest. A dull ache that asked the same question over and over again. How do you mourn something that pretends it never existed? How do you grieve when there's no grave to stand over? I wasn't given the dignity of an ending. I was denied history. And that kind of loss doesn't cry loudly. It corrodes. It eats inward. Because when someone deletes you, they don't just remove themselves from your life. They rewrite your identity. They force you to ask questions that have no answers. Was I real? Did I imagine it? Did any of it matter? And those questions are poison. They drip slowly into the mind. They dissolve certainty. They weaken the spine. For a while, I let them. I let your erasure define me. I shrank my own memories, questioned my own voice, second-guessed my own reality. I told myself maybe I exaggerated. Maybe I mattered less than I thought. Maybe I deserved to be erased. That's the most brutal part. Erasure teaches you to participate in your own disappearance. It convinces you to minimize yourself before anyone else can do it again. And I did that. I became smaller, quieter, careful. I learned how to exist without leaving fingerprints, because being deleted once teaches you fear. Fear of being remembered, fear of being seen, fear of taking up space. But fear doesn't stay pure, it ferments. And eventually it turns. Grief didn't stay grief, it hardened. Because the more I replayed it, the more I understood this wasn't accidental. You didn't forget me. You chose to remove me. You chose convenience over conscience, comfort over honesty, clean breaks over human decency. You chose the illusion of peace over the reality of responsibility. And that choice, it tells me everything. Deleting someone is an act of power. It's a declaration. It says I control the narrative. I decide who mattered. I decide what survives. And for a long time, I let you have that power. I let you be the editor of my existence. But here's what you didn't anticipate. You can delete records. You can erase traces. You can pretend history never happened, but you cannot erase what was forged. You cannot undo what was built in me. Because while you were deleting, I was becoming. You removed my name from your memory, but you burned it into my spine. No goodbye, no echo, no trace. Those words used to hurt. Now they sharpen me. Because I understand something now that grief couldn't show me. You didn't erase me because I was nothing. You erased me because remembering me would have required accountability. Because acknowledging me would have forced you to confront what you did. And that was too much. So you chose the cleanest cruelty. Pretend I never existed. And let me tell you something brutal. That kind of erasure doesn't come from strength. It comes from fear. Fear of consequences, fear of reflection, fear of facing someone you couldn't control. Strong people end chapters, weak people delete evidence, and I see the difference now. I don't beg to be remembered anymore. I don't chase validation from those who rewrite history to protect themselves. Because my existence is not dependent on your memory. I exist because I breathe. I exist because I endure. I exist because I survived being erased. And that survival, it changed me. Grief turned into bitterness. Not loud bitterness, not reckless, cold bitterness. The kind that clarifies, the kind that strips illusions bare. I no longer romanticize connection. I no longer assume permanence. I no longer confuse presence with loyalty, because I know how easily people delete what they don't want to face. And that knowledge, it made me dangerous. Because now when someone tries to erase me, I don't vanish. I solidify. I carve myself deeper into who I am. You took away the version of me that needed acknowledgement. You killed the part of me that begged to be remembered. And what replaced it? Something heavier, something quieter, something unerasable. I don't need a place in your memory. I built a place in myself. I don't need my name spoken by you. I speak it with conviction now. I don't need history with people who rewrite the past. I create my own legacy. And here's the final truth you can't escape. Deleting someone doesn't remove them. It reveals you. It exposes your limits, your cowardice, your refusal to own what you touched. You erased me to feel clean, but I was forged in the mess you ran from. No goodbye, no echo, no trace. Those were your weapons, but this is my outcome. I am not the ghost you tried to make me. I am the consequence you failed to consider. You didn't leave me. You deleted me. And in doing so, you created someone who no longer needs to exist inside anyone else's memory, because I remember myself. And that is something you can never erase. I buried the person I was waiting to be. There was a version of me who believed in arrival, a version who thought one day everything would make sense. One day the waiting would end. One day the answers would come. One day someone would choose me without hesitation. I buried that person, not violently, not in anger, quietly, with ceremony. Because hope, when it lingers too long, becomes a slow poison. I remember who I was waiting to be. Softer, kinder, more patient. The version that kept space open for apologies that never came. The version that believed silence meant confusion, not intent. The version that told itself, just a little longer, just one more chance, just wait. That version is dead. I didn't kill them out of cruelty. I killed them out of mercy. Because waiting became a form of self-betrayal. Every day I waited, I shrank. Every day I hoped, I delayed my own becoming. Hope kept me kneeling at doors that were never going to open. So I held a funeral, not with tears, with clarity. I stood over the grave of who I used to be, and I named everything I was letting go of. I buried expectation, the belief that people will meet you at the depth you meet them. I buried softness, not kindness, softness. The kind that lets others walk through you without consequence. I buried the need to be understood, because needing to be understood gave others power over my identity. I buried patience that was mistaken for weakness. I buried forgiveness that was never earned. I buried the version of me who kept explaining pain to people who benefited from causing it. Each shovel of dirt was heavy, because parts of me fought to stay alive. Hope doesn't die easily. It begs, it bargains, it whispers, what if you're wrong? What if they change? What if you're giving up too soon? I answered it with silence, because I learned something brutal. Waiting is not noble when it costs you yourself. And I was tired, tired of waking up half alive, tired of measuring my worth by someone else's attention, tired of rehearsing conversations that never happened, tired of holding space for people who erased me. So I lowered that version of me into the ground. The one who believed love was proven by endurance, the one who confused pain with depth, the one who thought suffering meant meaning. I let the dirt fall, and with every soundless impact, something inside me went numb, not empty, numb. Because emotional death is quieter than pain. Pain screams, death just settles. At first, the numbness scared me. I thought something was wrong. I thought maybe I had lost my humanity. But then I realized this numbness was protection. It was my nervous system finally laying down its weapons, finally saying, no more. I stopped reaching, stopped waiting, stopped hoping. And in that stillness, I felt something unfamiliar, peace, not the gentle kind, the cold kind, the kind that comes after acceptance. Acceptance that some people will never explain. Acceptance that closure is a luxury rarely given. Acceptance that you don't get answers, you get endings. And sometimes you have to build those endings yourself. I stopped imagining future versions of myself that depended on someone else's return. I stopped leaving doors unlocked. I stopped asking, what if? Because what if kept me suspended between who I was and who I needed to become. So I sealed the grave. I didn't look back. Not because it didn't hurt, but because staying would have killed me slower. There's a strange power in emotional death. When you bury hope, you stop negotiating with the past. When you bury softness, you stop bleeding for free. When you bury expectation, you stop being disappointed. And when you bury the person you were waiting to be, you force yourself to become someone else. Someone present, someone grounded, someone dangerous. Because there is nothing more dangerous than a person who no longer waits for permission. I felt hollow afterward, I won't lie. Like a house with the furniture removed, echoes everywhere, but emptiness is not weakness. Emptiness is space, space for something new, space for something harder, space for something unafraid. I didn't rise immediately. This wasn't rebirth yet. This was preparation. This was shedding. This was the silence before transformation. I let myself feel the absence, no longing. No yearning, just a clean break between who I was and who I would no longer be. I stopped romanticizing pain, stopped calling suffering a lesson. Some pain isn't a lesson, it's just damage, and I refused to keep paying for damage that wasn't my fault. So I honored the dead. I honored the version of me who tried, who loved deeply, who hoped sincerely, who waited patiently. They were not weak, they were human, but they were not built to survive this world, so I let them rest. And in doing so, I made a promise. I will never again abandon myself for the comfort of others. I will never again wait to be chosen. I will never again soften my boundaries to preserve someone else's convenience. The grave behind me is not a tragedy. It's a foundation. Because what grows next will not beg, will not chase, will not wait. What grows next will stand. Cold-eyed, clear-minded, unapologetic. I buried the person I was waiting to be, and I stayed alive. And that was the beginning. Then I understood something terrifying. I understood it in a moment of stillness. Not loud, not obvious, not dramatic, just a pause, a breath, a flicker of clarity. I had been waiting for something, someone to explain, someone to return, someone to fix the chaos left behind. But the truth, the terrifying, undeniable truth, no one was coming. No one was going to speak. No one was going to apologize. No one was going to fight for what I thought we shared. And in that realization I felt calm, the calm of a storm breaking, the kind of silence that doesn't bury you, it sharpens you. For years, silence had felt like a weapon against me, a blade twisting in invisible hands, a void that consumed answers, a punishment for caring too much, for believing too hard, for existing too fully. But now I see it clearly. Silence didn't weaken me. Silence refined me. Every absence, every ignored call, every vanishing act, they were chisels, cutting away the parts of me that depended on others for meaning. Every wound, every slight, every erased memory, they were fires, forging a version of me that could survive alone. Pain wasn't a curse. Pain was a teacher. Pain was the instrument of awakening, and the realization, terrifying as it was, hit like ice. I had been waiting for validation from people who never had the capacity to give it. I had been seeking affirmation from those who were only ever interested in themselves. I had been demanding relevance from those who erased me without hesitation. And the truth? The truth is brutal but necessary. I didn't need them. Not their words, not their attention, not their presence. Every expectation I had placed on others, every hope I had pinned to their actions was a chain. And every time they disappeared, every time they deleted me, every time they left me in the echoing silence, they cut the chain themselves. I was free. But freedom isn't soft. It isn't comforting. It doesn't whisper gentle promises. Freedom is sharp. Freedom is cold. Freedom demands courage. Freedom demands that you stare at the void and say, I am enough. I am more than enough, and I will not wait for anyone to confirm it. The terrifying part wasn't the silence itself. It was the knowledge that I could finally thrive in it, that the absence I feared could become my ally, that every person who left, every voice that vanished, every name that was erased, was refining me into someone unstoppable. I understood that pain wasn't punishment. Pain was preparation. Pain was the crucible in which I was forged. Every betrayal, every abandonment, every deletion, they had been tools, and I had been the unwitting apprentice. They had sharpened my mind. They had strengthened my resolve. They had burned away everything soft and uncertain. And now I stand here unbroken. Now I see the pattern. Now I understand the calculus of absence, and I am unafraid. Silence isn't weakness. Disappearance isn't loss. Pain isn't defeat. They are refinement. They are the forging fire. They are the sharpening stone. And when you understand that, when you truly see it, there is no going back. The world thinks absence diminishes. It believes silence erases. It imagines that pain destroys. But I know better. I have been refined. I have been sharpened. I have been made dangerous. And the terrifying truth? The terrifying truth is that I am no longer waiting, no longer pleading, no longer hoping. I am awake. I am alert. I am deliberate. I am unstoppable. Those who disappeared, those who erased, those who abandoned, they created me. They prepared me. They sharpened me. And now that I understand it, they are irrelevant. Every absence, every silence, every betrayal, it belongs to them. What belongs to me is power, clarity, and a certainty they will never understand, because I survived what they thought would break me. I endured what they thought would destroy me. I rose from the ashes of everything they denied, everything they deleted, everything they abandoned. And now I will never be anything less than what I am. And that is terrifying. You didn't win by leaving, you think you won, by disappearing, by walking away. By erasing me from your world, you think absence is victory. You think silence is conquest. You think leaving me behind makes you the one in control. You are wrong, wrong in ways you will never understand, because leaving me didn't break me, it didn't diminish me, it didn't erase me, it sharpened me, it focused me. It revealed the steel inside that you never saw. I am not your casualty. I am not a ghost you can haunt. I am not the story you rewrite to make yourself feel bigger. I am the author now. I write the chapters you refused to close. I speak the words you never said. I build the power you tried to steal. You left because you feared confrontation. You left because you feared the weight of your choices. You left because cowardice is easier than honesty. But leaving me, that gave me a gift you could never take back. I reclaimed myself in the vacuum you left. I pulled my power from the ashes of your absence. I stood in the emptiness and realized something terrifying for you. I do not need your permission to exist fully. I do not need your acknowledgement to take up space. I do not need your approval to rise. Your departure was not victory. It was a challenge, a test of what remained inside me, a fire to see if I could forge strength from betrayal. And I did. I molded rage into discipline. I transformed hurt into clarity. I turned absence into armor. You see, leaving me didn't make me small. It didn't shrink me. It didn't diminish my relevance. It exposed your weakness. The truth is simple. The strong do not vanish. The strong do not break when doors close. The strong do not fade when someone else chooses silence. I survived your leaving. I thrived because of it. I am sharper, harder, clearer than I ever was when you were here. So hear this, though you are not here to listen. You did not win. You never could. Leaving me behind was not a triumph. It was an opportunity. And I took it. I took it and I grew. I took it and I became something untouchable. I took it and I realized my strength is mine alone. You cannot diminish it. You cannot erase it. You cannot undo it. Your absence is now my proof. Your leaving is my testament. Your silence is the soil in which I rooted my power. I am not broken. I am not diminished. I am not lost. I am awake. I am alive. I am stronger than the fear you thought you could plant. And every step I take forward is a declaration. You didn't win, you never won. Because the only thing you could take from me was what I refused to surrender. And I surrendered nothing. Not my voice, not my presence, not my future. I am not your failure. I am not your regret. I am my own. And that truth, the truth that you cannot touch, cannot shake, cannot control, is my victory. I am standing, whole, unapologetic, unyielding. You left, yes, but leaving is not power. Leaving is weakness. The strong stay. The strong confront. The strong endure. And I endured. You didn't win. You will never win, because what you tried to erase has grown beyond you. It has become untouchable. It has become unstoppable. I am proof that absence can't conquer. I am proof that leaving doesn't break. I am proof that power is reclaimed by those who refuse to bow. You didn't win by leaving. I stopped waiting for answers. I stopped waiting. For answers, for explanations, for apologies that never came. I realized something brutal and yet liberating. Some questions will never be answered. Some people will never justify themselves. Some doors will never open, and that is not my burden. I spent years suspended, straining for reasons that were never offered, hanging on every silence, every pause, every absence, thinking that meaning would emerge if I just waited long enough. But waiting is a leash, a chain you put around your own wrist, and I am done being tethered to the choices of others. I stopped waiting because I understood the truth. Closure is a myth for the weak. Answers are luxuries granted, not rights owed. And the world doesn't pause for anyone's confusion, anyone's longing, anyone's hope. So I took it. I took authority over my own story. I became the narrator of my own silence, the author of my own conclusions, the judge and jury of my own worth. The questions that once haunted me. Why did you leave? Why did you disappear? Why me? They no longer hold power. I accepted that some chapters would remain unfinished. Some voices would never speak again. Some truths would forever live in shadows, and in that acceptance I found strength. Because unanswered questions cannot define me. They cannot imprison me. They cannot decide my fate. I reclaimed my energy from the endless loops of speculation. I reclaimed my peace from the tyranny of imagined explanations. I reclaimed my life from the cruel illusion that someone else's choices could dictate my stability. I stopped waiting and I began acting. I stopped asking and I began answering to myself. I stopped hoping and I began knowing I am enough. I am complete. I am sovereign in my own narrative. You left me with mysteries. You left me with silence. You left me with voids where understanding should have been. And I filled them with myself. I built my own meaning. I wrote my own conclusions. I created my own closure. No one else gave it. No one else offered it. No one else cared enough to. So I cared for me. I answered for me. I closed the circle for me. Waiting for your words would have chained me forever. Waiting for your explanations would have starved me slowly. Waiting for your return would have killed me piece by piece. I am alive because I stopped waiting. I am whole because I stopped hoping. I am powerful because I seized my own authority. The unanswered questions, they are no longer storms. They are no longer shackles. They are echoes, faint reminders of what I overcame. And every echo I hear now does not disturb me. It does not weaken me. It does not call me back to the past, because I am forward, because I am present, because I am untouchable by absence, silence, and denial. I am not a victim of unanswered questions. I am the master of my narrative. I am the force that writes endings. I am the hand that turns the page. And I will never, ever wait for permission to exist. I will never, ever wait for validation to rise. I will never, ever wait for someone else to decide my worth. I stopped waiting for answers. And in that refusal, I found everything. I found freedom. I found clarity. I found myself. Unshakable, unapologetic, unbound. I am the answer I was seeking. I am the closure I was denied. I am the power that was always mine. And the world, all of it with its silence and its absence, can no longer touch me. I stopped waiting. And in that moment, I became unstoppable. Silence taught me what love never did silence, the kind that screams louder than any word, the kind that stretches, infinite and merciless, through the spaces where warmth should have lived, the kind that leaves your chest hollow, your thoughts spinning, and your hope trembling on the edge of despair. I learned from that silence. I learned things love never taught me. I learned truths no embrace, no whisper, no touch could ever deliver. Love promised. Love promised light, safety, warmth. Love promised constancy, promised presence, promised understanding. But silence promised reality. Silence showed me the cracks. Silence revealed the shadows behind the smiles. Silence pulled the masks off the world and left me bare. It was painful, unforgiving, a teacher with no mercy. I felt every absence, every ignored message, every step backward that wasn't explained, every word withheld, every glance avoided, every door quietly closed in my face. And in that void, I realized the harshest truth. Love does not always arrive. Love does not always protect. Love does not always stay. And neither does anyone else. The lessons were brutal. They cut through soft illusions like knives through silk. They forced me to see what I could no longer deny. The world is not tender. People are not guarantees. Affection is not a shield. Promises are often empty. Silence showed me betrayal before the betrayer spoke. Silence revealed lies before they were confessed. Silence exposed weakness, cowardice, fear, before the world even dared to name it. And yet within that merciless void, I began to understand power. I began to understand clarity. I began to understand myself. I learned that trust is not given lightly. I learned that protection is not inherited. I learned that love is not a currency I can rely on. I learned that survival is forged in the quiet when no one else stands beside you. Silence taught me that the strongest heart is not the one that loves endlessly, but the one that survives without it. The strongest mind is not the one that forgives endlessly, but the one that reasons in the absence of explanation. The strongest soul is not the one that waits endlessly, but the one that rises when all else has fallen away. I hardened, I sharpened, I became unshakable. I learned that I do not need the world's affirmation to value myself. I learned that I do not need another's warmth to light my path. I learned that my own voice can be louder than the emptiest silence. Every omission became a lesson. Every departure became a roadmap. Every unanswered question became fuel. I understood that pain is not merely suffering. Pain is a teacher, pain is a mirror, pain is a compass, and silence, harsh, unrelenting silence, was the master instructor. Love left me unprepared. Love offered sweetness that could not protect me. Love showed smiles that could not guard me. Love promised constancy that dissolved at the first tremor of reality. But silence left no illusions. Silence showed me who I truly was. Silence forced me to face my own strength. Silence made me responsible for my own survival. Silence made me whole. I no longer seek answers in others. I no longer look for reassurance in their presence. I no longer define myself by the affection I receive. I define myself by the lessons I survive. I define myself by the strength I carve from the void. I define myself by the fire I forge in the absence of light. And now I know love is a gentle teacher. Silence is a merciless one. Love can comfort. Silence can elevate. Love can soothe wounds. Silence can sharpen them into armor. I am armored now. I am vigilant. I am aware. I am unbreakable. I have learned what love could not teach me. I have survived what tenderness could not shield me from. I have grown through what was meant to destroy me. And that growth, that clarity, that power is mine alone. Silence taught me what love never did, and in that harsh education I became unstoppable. I became untouchable. I became me. No one can silence me now. No one can erase me now. No one can leave me hollow again because I have learned, I have survived, I have conquered, and the silence that once threatened to consume me now serves me. Now fuels me, now crowns me. I am the product of absence. I am the heir of my own strength. I am the force that silence forged. And that force cannot be broken, cannot be bent, cannot be contained. I am unstoppable, unshakable, unbound. Silence taught me everything. Love could not. I will never forget. I will never surrender. I will never bow, because I learned the hardest way possible, and now I am untouchable. I rebuilt myself without permission. I did not ask for permission. No nods, no approval, no validation. I tore down the ruins of what I was, and I rebuilt myself from the bones, from the ash, from the shadows that no one else wanted to touch. No apology, no explanation, no hesitation. I forged myself in fire. Not the kind that burns and destroys, but the kind that sears and molds, that shapes weakness into armor, that sharpens pain into precision. I became my own architect, every flaw examined, every scar acknowledged, every limitation challenged. I did not wait for consent. I did not wait for encouragement. I did not wait for permission. No apology, no explanation, no hesitation. I disciplined myself ruthlessly. I woke before dawn when the world slept. I trained when the world rested. I pushed beyond what they said was impossible. I built muscles of mind, body, and spirit that would no longer bend, would no longer break, would no longer kneel. I stripped away dependence. I stripped away expectation. I stripped away every hand that once cradled me, every voice that once steered me, every reason I once needed to doubt my own power. No apology, no explanation, no hesitation. I sharpened my thoughts like blades. I honed my instincts like steel. I constructed a fortress around my soul, and the gates are mine alone to open. I rebuilt myself in silence. I rebuilt myself in solitude. I rebuilt myself in the moments they said I was weak, in the spaces they said I would fail, in the echoes of every absence, every betrayal, every erased memory. No apology, no explanation, no hesitation. I became disciplined not for recognition, not for love, not for pity. I became disciplined because I needed survival more than air, more than water, more than hope. I made my body obey my mind. I made my mind obey my will. I made my soul obey nothing but its own fire. I am no longer fragile. I am no longer tender. I am no longer a story written by someone else. No apology, no explanation, no hesitation. I rebuilt every part of myself they tried to destroy. I reconstructed every piece they tried to erase. I redefined every boundary they tried to set. I claimed authority over my own flesh, over my own thoughts, over my own destiny. No apology, no explanation, no hesitation. I became my own power. I became my own discipline. I became the storm that no one can predict, the force that no one can stop, the presence that no one can erase. I am deliberate. I am calculated. I am relentless, no longer fragile, no longer waiting, no longer restrained. I rebuilt myself without permission. I rebuilt myself without approval. I rebuilt myself without asking. No apology, no explanation, no hesitation. I am authority. I am mastery. I am unbound. I am my own creation. I am my own legacy. I am the force of every absence, every silence, every betrayal that tried to break me. No apology, no explanation, no hesitation. I did not survive to be gentle. I did not survive to forgive. I did not survive to wait. I survived to dominate. I survived to reclaim. I survived to rise. I rebuilt myself, and now I am complete. I am sharp. I am lethal. I am unstoppable. No apology, no explanation, no hesitation. I am mine. And no one will ever claim me again. I learned how to disappear without breaking. I didn't vanish because I was weak. I vanished because I was learning how to breathe without noise. They think disappearance means defeat. They think silence is surrender. They think absence is collapse. They are wrong. I didn't disappear to escape the world. I disappeared to study it, to watch without being seen, to listen without being hunted, to exist beyond their reach. I learned how to step back without falling apart, how to fade without fading away, how to remove myself without losing myself. This wasn't running, this was refinement. I stopped announcing my pain. I stopped explaining my scars. I stopped begging the world to understand me. Silence became my blade. I learned that the loudest people are usually the weakest. They need noise to feel real. They need validation to feel alive. They need witnesses to believe they matter. I needed none of that. I learned how to detach without becoming hollow, how to care less without becoming empty, how to cut emotional cords without bleeding out. Disappearance was not a retreat. It was a strategy. I pulled my energy inward. I withdrew my trust. I reclaimed every ounce of attention I had wasted on people who fed on my reactions. I stopped reacting, and in that stillness I became dangerous. Because when you stop reacting, they lose their power over you. I watched them panic in my absence. I watched them reach for me and find nothing. I watched them question their own importance when I stopped orbiting around their gravity, and I felt nothing. That's when I knew. Detachment isn't coldness, it's control. I mastered the art of being unreachable. Not physically, emotionally, they could speak. I would not answer. They could provoke. I would not respond. They could speculate, assume, distort my story. I would not correct them. Silence handled it for me. I learned that you don't need to defend the truth when you are the truth. You don't need to explain power when you embody it. I became invisible to those who didn't deserve access. I became unreachable to those who once thought they owned a piece of me. This wasn't numbness. This was discipline. I didn't kill my emotions. I put them under command. I stopped bleeding in public. I stopped turning wounds into conversations. I stopped mistaking vulnerability for connection. Some people don't want to heal you. They want to watch you bleed. So I disappeared. I stepped into the quiet where manipulation can't reach, where guilt can't chase, where expectations suffocate and die. I learned how powerful it is to say nothing, to explain nothing, to justify nothing. Because when you disappear without breaking, you take away their leverage. They can't guilt you. They can't provoke you. They can't rewrite you. All they can do is guess, and guessing makes them restless. I learned how to move in silence, to build in shadows, to evolve where no one could interrupt the process. Growth doesn't need an audience. Transformation doesn't need applause. I didn't disappear because I was lost. I disappeared because I was becoming precise. I stopped giving emotional access to anyone who hadn't earned it. I stopped offering pieces of myself to people who treated me like a resource instead of a presence. Silence filtered them out. The weak demand explanations. The entitled expect responses. The insecure fear you're quiet, and I let them fear, because fear keeps distance, and distance keeps control. I learned how to disappear without breaking by accepting a brutal truth. Not everyone deserves to know you. Not everyone deserves to understand you. Not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Privacy is power. I became untouchable not by fighting, but by removing myself from the battlefield entirely. I stopped engaging in wars that weren't worth winning. I stopped responding to chaos that fed on reaction. I stopped proving myself to people who never intended to see me clearly. Silence starved them, and in that starvation I grew stronger. I learned how to sit alone without feeling lonely, how to exist without external validation, how to be whole without being witnessed. That's when disappearance became a weapon. Because when you no longer need to be seen, you control when you appear. I choose when to speak. I choose when to step forward. I choose when to remind the world that I exist. And when I do, it matters. I am no longer accessible by default. I am no longer emotionally available to anyone who knocks. You don't get me because you want me. You get me because you earned proximity. I learned how to disappear without breaking because I stopped confusing attention with importance. The world doesn't need to see your strength for it to exist. In silence, I hardened. In absence, I sharpened. In isolation, I mastered myself. I didn't lose my heart. I armored it. I didn't lose my empathy. I aimed it carefully. I didn't become cruel. I became selective. This is cold control, not rage, not chaos, not revenge. Control. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that doesn't threaten. The kind that doesn't explain, the kind that watches, the kind that waits, the kind that decides. I learned how to disappear without breaking, and now I understand something most never will: the loud burnout, the desperate collapse, the reactive lose themselves. But those who master silence, those who learn to vanish without shattering, they return changed. Not louder, sharper, not softer, unmovable. I don't need to be seen to be powerful. I don't need to be heard to be dominant. I don't need to be present to control the outcome. I disappear when I choose. I return when I decide. And when I step back into the light, it will not be to explain myself. It will not be to reconnect. It will not be to apologize. It will be to take position. Because I didn't disappear to escape. I disappeared to ascend. And I came back with silence in my veins and control in my hands. I became what survives, not what begs. I stopped asking. I stopped pleading. I stopped bending to the weight of expectation. I realized something. Survival isn't about seeking permission. It isn't about asking for mercy. It isn't about hoping someone notices your endurance. Survival is taking what belongs to you, even if the world refuses to acknowledge it. I became what survives, not what begs. I stopped hoping for their compassion. I stopped waiting for validation. I stopped relying on their recognition to feel whole. I existed. And existing was enough. Weakness is seductive. It whispers that you are less. It whispers that you need someone else's approval. It whispers that you must explain, justify, apologize. I listened to it once, and it nearly destroyed me. Now I reject it. I reject the hand that reaches to lift me only to control me. I reject the voices that demand loyalty while giving none. I reject the need to be seen to be valuable. I became self-contained, a fortress of skin, bone, and thought. A mind sharpened against the harshness of absence. I survived because I stopped begging for life. I survived because I stopped pleading for love. I survived because I stopped explaining my worth. I became what survives. I became the unbreakable, the quiet storm, the presence that endures while others fade. There is power in refusing to bow, power in walking through fire without flinching, power in turning pain into a blueprint for existence. I am not fragile. I am not temporary. I am not what disappears under pressure. I am the remnant that refuses to crumble, the echo that will not vanish, the shadow that will not be dismissed. The world wants you to beg, it wants you to compromise, it wants you to prove you belong. I refused. I stopped shrinking to fit their definitions. I stopped softening to survive in their eyes. I stopped negotiating my essence. I became what survives, and surviving isn't passive. It isn't waiting. It isn't hoping. Survival is movement. It is selection. It is intelligence honed through endurance. I learned to move quietly, to act without apology, to exist without asking permission. I became invisible to those who sought to diminish me, and visible only to the truths that strengthened me. I learned the philosophy of survival. The world does not owe you recognition. The world does not owe you mercy. The world does not owe you protection. You owe it to yourself. You owe your presence to your own will. You owe your endurance to your own standards. You owe your growth to your own discipline. I became what survives, not what begs, because begging is weakness. Weakness invites exploitation. Weakness feeds despair. I learned to sever the threads that tethered me to expectation. I learned to close the doors that led to compromise. I learned to live by my own rules. I became unshakable, not by building walls, not by hiding from the storm, but by becoming the storm. I became relentless. I became calculated. I became the force that does not fracture under pressure. I survived where others surrendered. I endured where others faltered. I remained when others vanished. And in that endurance, I found clarity. Begging is optional. Submission is optional. Fear is optional. Strength is inevitable when you refuse the first three. I became what survives. I became what thrives. I became what endures. No apology, no compromise, no hesitation. I became what survives, not because the world favored me, not because anyone noticed, but because I refused to stop. I am not dependent on their approval. I am not chained by their indifference. I am not diminished by their absence. I became myself. Whole, unyielding, unstoppable. I survived the betrayals. I survived the silences. I survived the deletions. And I emerged, not asking for life, not begging for mercy, not pleading for love. I became what survives. And what survives dominates. I am not fragile. I am not fleeting. I am not forgotten. I endure, I persist. I exist with authority. I became what survives, not what begs, and in that truth I found power beyond their reach, power beyond their understanding, power beyond their control. I am the survivor, I am the remnant, I am the force that does not ask. I am what remains, I am what conquers, I am what survives. The silence that replaced screams the moment the noise stopped. I realized something terrifying. Absence can speak louder than anger. No argument, no final words. No echo, just a void. I was ready to fight. I was ready for confrontation. I was ready for anything, but you chose silence. You vanished. And in that disappearance, you betrayed me. Not with words, not with weapons, not with cruelty, but with nothing, empty rooms, unread messages, echoes that never returned. The world seemed hollow. My own reflection questioned itself. Was I not enough to warrant a final word? Was I invisible? Shock, paralysis, disbelief. I was left alone in the ruins of expectation. The silence became my first wound, and it ached, deep, permanent. I was prepared for war, not erasure. I sharpened my mind like a blade, expecting confrontation, expecting resistance, expecting truth. But what do you do when the opponent disappears? Where does the anger go when it has no target? Say something, say anything, say my name. I screamed into the void, and it screamed back. The cruelty of erasure is unmatched. To prepare for fire and find only ice, to brace for battle and find only absence. Resentment began to root itself. Quiet, cold, patient, waiting. When silence became the loudest weapon, silence is a weapon, a methodical, precise executioner. It dismantles identity, it fractures belief. It turns presence into doubt and expectation into suffocation. Shadows crept in. They filled the spaces you once occupied. I gasped for air in the void of your inattention. And slowly, slowly, I began to collapse inward. Piece by piece, I became a puzzle missing its edges. Silence had taught me terror, not with noise, but with absence, not with force, but with void. I replayed every word that never came. I became obsessive. Every word you didn't speak, I imagined. Every apology you never gave, I created. Every argument left unresolved, I relived 1,000 times. And somewhere in that endless replay, self-blame crept in. Doubt crept in, corroding confidence, gnawing at resolve. I tore myself apart in imagined conversations. I became my own executioner, and yet I survived. You left me alone with my demons, and when the last echo faded, there was only me. And my demons, pain reflected back like a cruel mirror, a mirror showing every weakness, every fear, every fracture. Isolation became the forge of darkness, a darkness I did not yet understand. But I knew it could teach me something. It whispered, either be consumed or become something dangerous. The fracture, I wasn't worth the fight, was I? I asked myself the question no one else would. Was I disposable? Was I irrelevant? Bitter, restrained. The words tasted of ash. Core insecurity became my closest companion. But the truth is, even in that pit, I began to learn survival doesn't need validation. Endurance doesn't need recognition. Disappearance is a choice, and you chose it, and then I realized this was no neutrality. This was cowardice. You left because you lacked the courage to confront me. And in your absence, I shifted blame from myself to you. You chose erasure. And that choice revealed your weakness, not mine. You didn't leave me, you deleted me, no goodbye, no echo, no trace. They tried to remove me from memory, from history, from relevance. And yet, here I am, not gone, not broken, not erased. I buried the person I was waiting to be. I let go of hope. I let go of softness. I buried the version of myself who trusted, who expected, who waited. A funeral for the self that begged. I felt numb. I felt empty. I felt ready, ready for what comes next. The realization then I understood something terrifying. Silence didn't weaken me. It sharpened me. Pain refined me. Absence sculpted me. Every fracture became a line of strength. I realized survival isn't about avoiding pain. It's about using it, turning it into clarity. You didn't win by leaving. I spoke, even without you here. I reclaimed power. I declared my strength. The absence that should have broken me only taught me control. I became the master of the void you left behind. I stopped waiting for answers. Closure is a myth. Answers are a trap. I stopped seeking them. I stopped hoping for explanation. I stopped relying on the world to define my narrative. I took it. I controlled it. I wrote my own story. Silence taught me what love never did. Pain is the greatest teacher. Betrayal is the sharpest instructor, and silence the cruelest professor. I learned to trust only what endures. I learned to rely only on myself. I learned that love does not always nurture. Sometimes survival teaches better. No apology, no explanation, no hesitation. I forged a new self. Ruthless, disciplined, complete. Every fracture became a foundation. Every wound became armor. I rebuilt myself in defiance of expectation. I became authority incarnate. I became unstoppable. I learned how to disappear without breaking. I mastered absence. I turned silence into strategy. I became invisible to manipulation, cold, controlled, detached from their judgments, their whims, their negligence. I disappeared, but I did not break. I became untouchable. I became what survives, not what begs. I stopped asking. I stopped pleading. I stopped bending to expectation. Begging is weakness. Survival is power. I became relentless. I became calculated. I became the storm. I endured. I persisted. I existed with authority. I became what survives, not because the world favored me, but because I refused to stop. The silence that replaced screams the moment the noise stopped. I realized something terrifying. Absence can speak louder than anger. No argument. No final words, no echo, just a void. I was ready to fight. I was ready for confrontation. I was ready for anything. But you chose silence. You vanished. And in that disappearance, you betrayed me, not with words, not with weapons, not with cruelty, but with nothing, empty rooms, unread messages, echoes that never returned. The world seemed hollow. My own reflection questioned itself. Was I not enough to warrant a final word? Was I invisible? Shock, paralysis, disbelief. I was left alone in the ruins of expectation. The silence became my first wound, and it ached, deep, permanent. I was prepared for war, not erasure. I sharpened my mind like a blade, expecting confrontation, expecting resistance, expecting truth. But what do you do when the opponent disappears? Where does the anger go when it has no target? Say something, say anything, say my name. I screamed into the void, and it screamed back. The cruelty of erasure is unmatched. To prepare for fire and find only ice. To brace for battle and find only absence. Resentment began to root itself. Quiet, cold, patient, waiting. When silence became the loudest weapon, silence is a weapon, a methodical, precise executioner. It dismantles identity, it fractures belief. It turns presence into doubt and expectation into suffocation. Shadows crept in, filling the spaces you once occupied. I gasped for air in the void of your inattention. And slowly, slowly, I began to collapse inward. Piece by piece, I became a puzzle missing its edges. Silence taught me terror, not with noise, but with absence. Not with force, but with void. I replayed every word that never came. I became obsessive. Every word you didn't speak, I imagined. Every apology you never gave, I created. Every argument left unresolved, I relived 1,000 times. And somewhere in that endless replay, self-blame crept in, doubt crept in, corroding confidence, gnawing at resolve. I tore myself apart in imagined conversations. I became my own executioner, and yet I survived. You left me alone with my demons, and when the last echo faded, there was only me and my demons. Pain reflected back like a cruel mirror, showing every weakness, every fear, every fracture. Isolation became the forge of darkness, a darkness I did not yet understand. But I knew it could teach me something. It whispered, either be consumed or become something dangerous. The fracture I wasn't worth the fight, was I? I asked myself the question no one else would. Was I disposable? Was I irrelevant, bitter, restrained? The words tasted of ash. Core insecurity became my closest companion, but the truth is, even in that pit, I began to learn. Survival doesn't need validation. Endurance doesn't need recognition. Disappearance is a choice, and you chose it, and then I realized this was no neutrality. This was cowardice. You left because you lacked the courage to confront me. And in your absence, I shifted blame from myself to you. You chose erasure, and that choice revealed your weakness, not mine. You didn't leave me, you deleted me. No goodbye, no echo, no trace. They tried to remove me from memory, from history, from relevance. And yet, here I am, not gone, not broken, not erased. I buried the person I was waiting to be. I let go of hope. I let go of softness. I buried the version of myself who trusted, who expected, who waited, a funeral for the self that begged. I felt numb. I felt empty. I felt ready. Ready for what comes next. The realization then I understood something terrifying. Silence didn't weaken me, it sharpened me. Pain refined me. Absence sculpted me. Every fracture became a line of strength. I realized survival isn't about avoiding pain, it's about using it, turning it into clarity. You didn't win by leaving. I spoke, even without you here. I reclaimed power. I declared my strength. The absence that should have broken me only taught me control. I became the master of the void you left behind. I stopped waiting for answers. Closure is a myth. Answers are a trap. I stopped seeking them. I stopped hoping for explanation. I stopped relying on the world to define my narrative. I took it. I controlled it. I wrote my own story. Silence taught me what love never did. Pain is the greatest teacher. Betrayal is the sharpest instructor. Silence the cruelest professor. I learned to trust only what endures. I learned to rely only on myself. I learned that love does not always nurture. Sometimes survival teaches better. The forging, I rebuilt myself without permission, no apology, no explanation, no hesitation. I forged a new self, ruthless, disciplined, complete. Every fracture became a foundation. Every wound became armor. I rebuilt myself in defiance of expectation. I became authority incarnate. I became unstoppable. I learned how to disappear without breaking. I mastered absence. I turned silence into strategy. I became invisible to manipulation. Cold, controlled, detached from their judgments, detached from their whims, detached from their negligence. I disappeared, but I did not break. I became untouchable. I became what survives, not what begs. I stopped asking. I stopped pleading. I stopped bending to expectation. Begging is weakness. Survival is power. I became relentless. I became calculated. I became the storm. I endured. I persisted. I existed with authority. I became what survives. Not because the world favored me, but because I refused to stop. The ascent, I am the silence they feared, every absence that once broke me, every ghost of a word that never came, every shadow of betrayal I swallowed. I digested it, I transformed it, I made it mine, and now silence bows to me. Pain bends to me, the void trembles because I survived it. I am the echo they cannot reach. I am the presence they cannot erase. I am the storm that refuses to kneel. No apology, no explanation. No mercy, I am the consequence they did not see coming. Strength is a choice. Every scar, every tear, every sleepless night was a teacher. I could have crumbled, I could have begged, I could have faded into irrelevance, but I didn't. I chose strength. I chose survival. I chose mastery over myself and over everything they thought could destroy me. I stand because the world tried to break me, and I built a fortress from the fragments of its attacks. No one controls me. I am not bound by expectation. I am not defined by absence. I am not diminished by betrayal. Authority lives in my hands. Power lives in my voice. My identity cannot be erased. Look at me. Look at the scars. Do you see weakness, or do you see proof that I survived and I conquered? The final declaration: let them hate, let them fear, let them fall. I am the fire they cannot douse. I am the shadow that walks free. I am the survivor, the unbroken, the unstoppable. I am my own reckoning. I am my own justice. I am the nightmare that silence could never teach, and in this darkness I thrive. The declaration, if you ever hear my name again, if you ever hear my name again, do not speak it lightly. Do not whisper it in fear or in hope. Do not carry it as a memory, carry it as a warning, because I am no ghost. I am no shadow of what you knew. I am not the person who waited, who begged, who vanished beneath your silence. I am the reckoning. I am the storm. I am the consequence you never prepared for. Every absence you left, every betrayal you planted, every word you refused to speak fed me. Fed the fire you thought you doused, fed the strength you thought you broke, fed the darkness you thought would devour me. And now I walk among the living, but I carry the weight of 1,000 silences. Every one of them sharpened me. Every one of them perfected me. Every one of them whispered, "Become unstoppable. I will be remembered." Do not mistake my silence for weakness. Do not mistake my absence for submission. Do not think you can erase me, for I have etched myself into the edges of reality. I am the quiet before the storm. I am the shadow behind the door you never check. I am the frost that cracks stone. I am the voice that will echo long after you forget to listen. No apology, no mercy, no trace of hesitation. If you hear my name again, hear it as it was meant to be, as a warning, as a testament, as a monument to what survives when everything else falls. I am the myth you could not kill. Legends are born of fear, of silence, of absence. You thought you could bury me, but I have grown, I have risen. I have claimed a throne built from the ruins you left behind. I am not a story you tell lightly. I am the tale that haunts you at night. I am the lesson you cannot unlearn. I am the proof that silence can forge an empire. Remember this, you did not break me. You did not win. You did not erase me. You only made me inevitable. The warning, if you ever hear my name again, do not think it is safe. Do not think it is coincidence. Do not think it is mercy. I am not mercy. I am not coincidence. I am not safe. I am precision. I am inevitability. I am survival. And those who forget, those who doubt, will remember. They will remember what it feels like to face something they cannot control. Something they cannot erase. Something that will outlast them. I am that. I am the shadow in their victory. I am the silence after their laughter. I am the name they dare not speak again. The ascension, I am no longer bound by absence. I am no longer shaped by betrayal. I am no longer diminished by silence. I am the force that endures, the presence that commands, the power that rises when all else crumbles. And if you hear my name again, hear it as a prophecy, because I am and I will remain. I am the storm. I am the shadow. I am the consequence. I am the one you should have feared. All along, no apologies, no explanations, no hesitation. I am unbroken. I am unstoppable. I am the name you will never forget. I am no longer available for silence. Not yours, not theirs, not anyone who thinks my absence is optional. For years I bent, I waited. I filled the spaces you left empty with questions, with hope, with echoes of myself that no one heard. But I am done. Done carrying the weight of voices that never answered. Done shrinking to fit the gaps you left. Done hoping that one day someone would see me. I see myself now, and what I see is unbroken. What I see is fire. What I see is authority. Silence was your weapon. It was meant to cage me, to make me doubt, to make me crawl. You thought your absence could erase me, that the void you left would hollow me out. It did not. It forged me. It sharpened me. Every unspoken word, every disappearing act, every hesitation on your part, every one of them became a chisel, sculpting a version of me that does not bow, that does not plead, that does not wait. I am no longer available for silence, because silence is cowardice. Silence is absence disguised as neutrality. Silence is the refusal to face what is real, And I am done teaching, done waiting, done excusing. Do you think your quiet is harmless? Do you think that leaving me to guess, to suffer, to question my worth was invisible? No. Every moment you withheld, every time you chose nothing over confrontation, you carved your own insignificance. And I grew into a presence that fills the space you abandoned. I grew into a voice that demands attention. I grew into a soul that does not negotiate its existence with anyone. I am no longer available for silence. I will not make room for doubt, for disrespect, for negligence. I will not lean into the empty voids others create, waiting for their permission to exist. I will not shrink for anyone's comfort. Look at me. Look at the scars you tried to ignore. Look at the strength you hoped would break under your absence. Do you see weakness, or do you see a force you can no longer erase? I am here. I am loud. I am relentless. I am undeniable. I speak because I choose to. I move because I will. I exist because I refuse to be optional. No apology. No explanation. No hesitation. The silence you offered me is the silence I leave behind. I am done with it. I am done with you. I am done with the idea that my voice is negotiable. I am no longer available for silence. If you attempt to fade again, to vanish, to ignore, know this: I am watching. I am remembering. I am recording in the fire of my own becoming. And when I speak, when I act, when I claim what is mine, there will be no shadow of doubt left. I am the authority of my own life. I am the keeper of my own time. I am the force that will not yield, will not wait, will not beg. Silence was your weapon. I turned it into my compass. Absence was your strategy. I turned it into my throne. And now the only thing I offer is presence, unyielding, unbroken, unapologetic. I am no longer available for silence. Listen closely. You may hear my name. You may feel my power. You may sense the force of someone who refuses to be dismissed again. This is the end of waiting, the end of questioning, the end of bending. The end of absence holding meaning over me. I am no longer available for silence, and in that refusal I have claimed everything. I am whole. I am unstoppable. I am authority incarnate. I am here, and I will not be ignored. Let the world adjust to my presence, absolute control, unquestionable authority. I am not asking to be understood anymore. Understanding was a luxury I offered when I still believed people listened with honesty. When I still thought silence meant confusion, not avoidance. When I still thought patience was strength instead of permission for disrespect. That version of me is gone. What stands here now does not explain itself. What stands here now does not wait for consensus. What stands here now does not soften its edges to be palatable. I did not rise to be accepted. I rose to be undeniable. Let the world adjust to my presence. I spent too long adapting to rooms that never made space for me. Too long lowering my voice so others could remain comfortable. Too long pretending that restraint was the same as virtue. It is. Restraint without respect is self-erasure. Silence without choice is surrender, and I do not surrender. I learned something in the dark, something no one teaches you when they still believe the world is fair. Power does not announce itself. It arrives fully formed, already certain, already finished. That is what I am now, finished, not exhausted, not empty, complete. I no longer chase reactions. I no longer seek validation. I no longer wait for acknowledgement to move forward. If you see me, good. If you don't, irrelevant. My existence does not depend on your awareness. I am not here to convince. I am here to be, and that is what terrifies people most. Because when someone stops explaining, stops negotiating, stops asking for permission, they become uncontrollable. They become a constant. They become something you must work around instead of over. That is my final form. I do not shout, I do not threat, I do not beg, I simply move forward. And everything that cannot withstand that movement will be crushed under it, not out of cruelty, but inevitability. This is not revenge. This is alignment. I am aligned with my own worth. I am aligned with my own direction. I am aligned with my own authority. Anyone who cannot stand in that alignment will fall away naturally. No conflict required. No explanation given. That is true power. Remember this moment, not because I asked you to, but because you will have no choice. When my name is spoken with hesitation, when my presence shifts rooms, when my absence feels heavier than your noise ever was, this is where the story ends for the version of me that waited. And this is where the legend begins for the version of me that never does again. I did not disappear to be forgotten. I disappeared to return finished. Now I am here, unmovable, unreachable, unquestionable. Let the world adjust. You did argue, you disappeared, you didn't argue, you didn't fight, you didn't even speak, you disappeared. And that absence, that silence, it spoke louder than any words ever could. It was a verdict, a judgment. An invisible sentence passed without a courtroom, without witnesses, without mercy. I remember waiting, waiting for the defense that never came, waiting for the explanation that would never arrive, waiting for the person I thought I knew to prove they existed. But they were gone, not for a reason. Not for necessity, not for survival, gone because leaving was easier than facing me. Gone because courage never had a place in their repertoire, gone because confrontation is heavy, and they are hollow. You didn't argue, you disappeared, repeat it, let it echo. You didn't argue, you disappeared. Every argument I imagined, every confrontation I rehearsed, every answer I prepared for vanished into the void because you had already vanished. I replayed it over and over, in my mind. In the quiet corners of my soul, the space you abandoned became a mirror. And in that mirror, I saw everything you refused to face. I saw the emptiness of avoidance, the cowardice masquerading as neutrality, the audacity of choosing nothing over accountability. You didn't argue, you disappeared. And in that disappearance, you left me a gift, not a gift wrapped in kindness, not a gift wrapped in apology, but a gift nonetheless, the gift of clarity, the gift of knowing, the gift of seeing you for what you are. And I see you. I see the void where your courage should have been. I see the shadows that passed as intention. I see the retreat masquerading as decision. You didn't argue, you disappeared. Do you understand what that means for me? It means I don't wait anymore. It means I don't plead anymore. It means I don't hope for explanations that will never arrive. It means I don't need you. Your disappearance was a test, and I passed it. I watched the silence, and it did not break me. I watched the absence, and it did not define me. I watched your vanishing act, and I rose in full presence. You didn't argue, you disappeared, but here I stand, whole, undiminished, unapologetic, unbroken, and let this be the judgment you never delivered, the verdict you never faced. I am not the one left behind. I am not the one lost. I am the one who remains. You thought leaving would hurt me. You thought your absence would weaken me. You thought I would crumble in the space you abandoned. But I filled it, I expanded it, I owned it. I transformed your retreat into my power. You didn't argue, you disappeared, and now the world knows the truth. Courage does not lie in vanishing, strength does not beg for acknowledgement, and survival is not measured by presence alone. You didn't argue, you disappeared, but I will speak. I will declare. I will exist in the fullness you never could. I will argue, not with you, not with your absence, but with the universe itself. With the force that tested me, with the silence you left behind, and I will win. You didn't argue, you disappeared, but I am here, I am seen, I am heard, I am reckoning. This is my judgment, this is my verdict. This is my answer to the empty space you left behind. I don't forgive, I don't forget. I do not bend to those who vanish. You didn't argue, you disappeared. And I am stronger because of it. I am sharper because of it. I am whole because of it. Let the record show absence is not innocence. Disappearance is not neutrality. Leaving is not victory. You didn't argue, you disappeared. And I endured, I transcended, I thrived. You didn't argue, you disappeared. And that is my final word. I speak last, always I speak last. Not because I am patient, not because I am polite, not because I wait for permission. I speak last because I endure, because I observe, because I know what disappears and what remains. Everything else is noise. Everything else is a rehearsal. Everything else is the prelude to the reckoning that I command. They speak first. They shout. They argue. They fight to be heard, to be remembered, to leave an echo in the void. I listen. I wait. I measure. And when the dust settles, when the smoke clears, when the world leans in for the verdict, I speak. Because my words are not born of impulse. They are forged in fire, tempered in betrayal, hardened by silence, and sharpened by the void left behind by those who vanished. I speak last, and when I speak, the world leans in. They lean in not because they want to, but because they must. Because the weight of what I am cannot be ignored. Look at your chaos. Look at your noise. Look at your fleeting presence. I am still standing. I am still here. I am still whole. I speak last. And in my words there is warning. There is reckoning. There is power. I am the echo they cannot erase. I am the storm they cannot outrun. I am the truth they refuse to see. I speak last. And in speaking last, I reclaim everything they tried to take, every piece of my being, every ounce of my authority, every claim to my existence. No apology, no explanation, no hesitation, I speak last. And when I do, let them know every absence they leave, every silence they force, every betrayal they weave. It does not break me, it does not bend me, it does not weaken me. I speak last, and that is the final judgment. The ultimate reckoning, the unshakable truth. I endure, I dominate, I ascend, I speak last always. I became a stranger in my own reflection. I looked at myself one day and realized I was not the person I had been waiting to be. I was not the person they thought they could break. I was not the person who would wait for permission, for acknowledgement, for validation. I shed that skin. I buried it beneath the weight of everything they took from me, everything they refused to see, everything they believed would define me. And in that silence, in that absence of approval, I found a clarity that no apology could grant. I discovered a power they never imagined existed. I discovered that when the world writes your ending, you can rewrite yourself entirely. I discovered that disappearance is a weapon and reinvention is a shield. I learned to walk through the shadows and leave nothing behind. No doubts. No pleas, no attachments. Every expectation they placed upon me became fuel. Every betrayal became a stone in the foundation of who I would become. I became unrecognizable because I refused to remain small. I became unrecognizable because I refused to wait for mercy. I became unrecognizable because I refused to be their version of me. I am not soft. I am not subtle. I am not here to be understood. I am here to endure, to rise, to command the space they once occupied. I am the answer they refused to give me. I am the reckoning they could not foresee. Every step I take echoes a warning. Every breath I claim is a testament. Every scar, every fragment of what they tried to erase is now armor. I do not move through the world asking for permission. I move through it taking what is mine. I am no longer tethered to expectation. I am no longer beholden to past versions of myself. I am no longer available to their influence. I became unrecognizable not because I wanted to hide, but because I wanted to dominate. Not because I sought revenge, but because I sought control. Not because I was angry, but because I was resolute. Every hesitation is gone. Every uncertainty burned away in the fire of my own creation. I stand exact. I stand lethal. I stand final. Look at me now. This is not a person. This is a force. This is a presence that commands attention even in absence. I am not the echoes of their choices. I am not the shadow of their indifference. I am the declaration they will remember long after my name fades from lips. I do not rage, I do not scream, I do not need to. Silence has taught me more than their words ever could. Stillness has hardened me where doubt once lingered. Every beat of my heart carries the weight of what I have survived and the certainty of what I will achieve. I am calculated. I am precise. I am absolute. And now they will recognize me, not in memory, not in expectation, but in inevitability. I will move through the world in a way that cannot be ignored. I will take up space they thought was theirs to hold. I will command without apology. I will exist without hesitation. I will not be forgotten. I became unrecognizable because I refused to be anyone's afterthought. I became unrecognizable because the world demanded obedience, and I answered with sovereignty. I became unrecognizable because what survives is not what begs. What survives is not what pleads. What survives is relentless. What survives is indomitable. I am the final form of myself. I am the storm they cannot weather. I am the shadow they cannot outrun. I am the fire that does not burn out. I am the blade that does not falter. I am the silence that crushes noise. I am the unshakable. And this is why I became unrecognizable, because I am not merely alive. Because I am not merely present. Because I am not merely enduring. I am dominance made flesh. I am the conclusion. I am the reckoning. I am the one who remains when all else falls. Look for me and you will see power itself rendered in form. Search for me and you will find precision incarnate. Whisper my name and it will echo in your understanding of fear, control, and inevitability. I am not what you lost. I am what you could never possess. I became unrecognizable. Because I refused to remain human in the ways they demanded. Because I refused to wait, to kneel, to forgive. Because I refused to be weak when the world tested strength. Because I am no longer available to anyone but myself. I am complete. I am exact. I am unstoppable. And that is why I became unrecognizable. I was not born this way. I was made by absence, made by silence. Made by the moment I realized no one was coming to save me. They didn't leave me with explanations. They didn't leave me with closure. They didn't leave me with respect. They left me with nothing. And that is where this began. At first, I waited. I waited for answers. I waited for remorse. I waited for recognition that I mattered. I told myself patience was strength. I told myself restraint was wisdom. I told myself silence meant peace. I was wrong. Silence did not comfort me. It carved me, slowly, precisely, without emotion. Days passed. Then months. Then the terrifying realization arrived. They weren't thinking about me at all. No goodbye, no echo, no trace. I was not abandoned. I was deleted, erased from conversations, removed from memory, written out of relevance like a mistake that never mattered enough to correct. That was the first death. Grief came quietly, not dramatic, not poetic, just heavy. It sat in my chest like unfinished sentences. It made every breath feel unnecessary. It made every hope feel embarrassing. I mourned someone who was still alive. I mourned the version of myself that believed loyalty would be returned. I mourned the softness I mistook for virtue. Then bitterness followed. Not rage, not fire. Bitterness is colder. It doesn't scream. It watches. I stopped asking why. I stopped rehearsing conversations that would never happen. I stopped begging the past to explain itself. Instead, I buried something. I buried the person I was waiting to become. I held a funeral without witnesses. No flowers. No speeches, no mercy. I laid to rest the hopeful version of myself. The one who believed effort guaranteed fairness. The one who thought being good would be enough. I lowered expectations into the ground. I buried forgiveness beside them. I sealed the grave with reality. And something terrifying happened. I felt nothing. No tears, no relief, no pain, just clarity. That emotional numbness wasn't weakness. It was preparation. Because when emotion dies, precision is born. That's when I understood something terrifying. Silence didn't weaken me, it sharpened me. Pain wasn't punishment, it was refinement. Every unanswered question became discipline. Every ignored message became restraint. Every night alone became training. I learned how to sit with discomfort without flinching. I learned how to let wounds close without needing an apology. I learned how to hear my own thoughts without drowning in them. And slowly, I stopped reacting. That's when control returned. You didn't win by leaving. You didn't overpower me. You didn't break anything permanent. You just revealed who I could become without distraction. I reclaimed my focus. I reclaimed my time. I reclaimed authority over my own narrative. No more chasing explanations. No more begging for clarity. I stopped waiting for answers. Because answers require permission from people who don't respect you. I chose independence instead. I decided that unanswered questions would no longer own space in my mind. That uncertainty would no longer dictate my worth. If something ended without explanation, I let it end incomplete. Not everything deserves resolution. Some things deserve burial. Silence taught me what love never did. Love taught me attachment. Silence taught me self-control. Love promised safety. Silence delivered truth. Silence taught me that trust is not given. It is earned slowly, tested ruthlessly, withdrawn without hesitation. It taught me that loyalty without boundaries is self-betrayal. That kindness without strength invites exploitation. That hope without discipline is delusion. My worldview hardened, not into cruelty, into clarity. Then came the forging. I rebuilt myself without permission, no apology, no explanation, no hesitation. I didn't ask who I was allowed to become. I decided. I stripped myself down to essentials, removed habits that weakened me, cut ties that diluted my focus. Discipline replaced motivation. Consistency replaced emotion. I became accountable to results, not feelings. No apology, no explanation, no hesitation. I learned how to disappear without breaking. I mastered emotional distance. I learned how to observe without engaging, how to withdraw without resentment. Disappearance became a weapon. Silence became leverage. I was present without being accessible, visible without being reachable. Cold control replaced chaos. I became what survives, not what begs. Survival does not plead. Survival adapts. Survival evolves. I rejected weakness disguised as vulnerability. I rejected suffering that demanded an audience. My identity solidified. Then came the declaration. If you ever hear my name again, it will not be in longing. It will not be in regret. It will not be in nostalgia. It will be spoken carefully. Because what disappears and returns disciplined is no longer harmless. This is not a threat. This is a reflection. I am no longer available for silence that disrespects me, for absence that demands loyalty, for confusion that benefits others. My self-worth is no longer negotiable. You didn't argue, you didn't fight, you disappeared, and that was the verdict, because walking away without honesty is not strength, it is avoidance. and avoidance taught me everything I needed to know. So now I am calm, not because I forgot, because I transcended, not because I forgave, because I outgrew. I became unrecognizable, not out of rage, out of resolve, not to hide. To dominate, I am no longer shaped by what I lost. I am defined by what survived. I do not announce myself. I arrive prepared. I do not seek validation. I generate results. I am not loud. I am inevitable. This is not revenge. This is evolution. This is what happens when someone stops waiting, stops begging, stops explaining. This is what remains, and that is why I became unrecognizable.